Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this program in the Balie called The Portrayal of a Utopia, 75 Years of Chinese Propaganda. This program is a collaboration between the Balie and the LeidenAsiaCentre. My name is Florian Schneider. I'm the Managing Director of the LeidenAsiaCentre. For those of you who don't know the LeidenAsiaCentre, it's almost impossible, but let's just say. It is the leading knowledge center in the Netherlands about Asia, aiming to show the value and the relevance of research on Asia to a wider audience outside of the university. So we do research projects for government and business, and we organize training and courses and organize public events like this to kind of hopefully enhance a better understanding of developments in Asia. So that's a quick plug for the LeidenAsiaCentre. So 75 years of Chinese propaganda is not a complete coincidence. It is this month also 75 years since the People's Republic of China was founded. And today is all about narratives, propaganda and narratives, and how were those narratives used in the past, let's say at the founding of the People's Republic, and how is it used today, and how does it end up with the consumer, with the Chinese audience, and how effective is it? So those are the questions we are going to try and answer. But before we do that, I have a question for the audience, for which I'm going to use this microphone, if it works. And if I can see the first slide, please. I'm curious what you think propaganda is. So if you feel this is propaganda, please raise your hand. I think we can all assume that this is quite propaganda-like. So next slide, please. What about this? Propaganda or no? Yeah, propaganda. This is quite clearly propaganda, right? Okay, next slide, please. Propaganda. You feel it's propaganda. Who doesn't feel this is propaganda? And why not? Okay. I'm gonna go to the back. See, yeah, because now you're in the spotlight. Why do you not feel this is propaganda?
I think this is for the greater good and not for a party into the politics. Okay, I'm not sure if it's for the greater good, but yeah.
Okay, very good. Can I see the next slide, please? Who feels that this is propaganda? You feel that this is propaganda. Okay. What's the difference in the messaging of this one and the previous one? You're in a very tight spot there.
The difference in the messaging?
Yeah, I mean, why is this propaganda?
Well, I think like all the reclame, how do you say? Like yeah, the advertising, all the advertising the government does to a certain degree, you can classify it as propaganda, because also the doing taxes is meant for the government to sustain itself. So I think you could classify it as propaganda, but we don't see it as such because we think propaganda is negative. But
right, exactly. So there's a difficult and fine line between something that we would consider to be propaganda. Can I see the next slide, please? And what we consider to be public information. Who feels that this is propaganda? It helps if you understand the Chinese, by the way. So this is a poster from 1953 when the People's Republic was just founded, and it's about the freedom of marriage. So that has a lot to do with the new Marriage Act. Before that, it was a lot of the time it was arranged marriages, and that led, in the eyes of the party, to a lot of unhappiness. So people should have the right to choose their own partner and marry at their own at the moment of their choosing. So, okay, so I mean, this is not a sort of definite conclusion. Maybe we can use this one now. It's not something that you can draw a definite conclusion to, but it's something to consider and contemplate. And it is also something that will recur probably tonight as well, whether something that the Chinese public information or government information, whether it's propaganda or whether it's public information, difficult discussion. Anyway, so we are fortunate to have a set of distinguished guests today. First, we have a panel with Ardi Bouwers and Florian Schneider. And then after that, there will be a second panel with two other speakers that who I will introduce later on. First, I'd like to give Ardi Bouwers the floor to do a keynote speech. Ardi Bouwers is a sinologist, university lecturer on China in the 21st century at the University of Amsterdam, and is director of the consultancy China Cirkel, and is specialized in intercultural communication. So please, Ardi Bouwers, the floor is yours.
So, Chinese propaganda. I think one of the slides that we saw just now, or two of the slides, are Mao-era propaganda posters. And this is one where Mao is seen as the sun, as somebody who is almost godlike, and where people cherish Mao Zedong. And this is a whole group of people from all sorts of different cultural background. So this is pure propaganda where Mao is sort of, he floats above the Chinese population, and he is more than human. Now, looking at Chinese propaganda a little bit more in depth, I like this poster because it shows how hard work doing propaganda is. This is a poster where you see a post, a woman, a woman who delivers the post, the mail, and she also reads the newspaper and explains to people in the countryside what the news is all about. And then there is somebody from the military who explains the same thing. So basically, a propaganda worker reaches out to a lot of ordinary Chinese and tries to explain what government policy is all about. And if you look inside homes of not so ordinary Chinese, you can see that there used to be a radio especially for the people who are a little bit more wealthy, or for the party cadres. The father of the family is reading the newspaper, the People's Daily, and the son is reading, is sort of engrossed in the China Pictorial. So you see, for many different audiences, there is information that is being provided. And you can see this is quite a wealthy family, because not everyone owned a radio, and a lot of people did not have newspapers as well. So what you can see if you look at these kinds of posters, they were hand painted. It was really an art. And there is a small museum in Shanghai that is a China propaganda poster museum. And the man who set it up has only been collecting hand-painted posters, and I showed him some newer posters at some point, and he really did not like that. He said, well, everything that is computer animated is really not interesting at all. So that's this kind of a poster. So we now jump from Mao Zedong to Xi Jinping, the current leader. And this is a new style propaganda poster saying, China's dream is my dream. And these kinds of posters you can see in all over China, basically, in many different places. And people were being invited to explain what their dreams for the future were. And then at some point, the Chinese communist leadership stepped in and said what the Chinese dream should be. It should not be the call for more democracy or constitutionalism, but it should be the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. And these kinds of posters you can see in the streets, in parks, in subways, and they're everywhere. What Xi Jinping wants from his propaganda people is to tell China's story well. So basically, it's a way of establishing discourse power within China to the Chinese population, but also to the rest of the world. So discourse power is really important here. And it's nice to look at a development of different kinds of propaganda around China's leader. This is a propaganda poster, a cartoon-like propaganda poster from the early days of Xi Jinping, where it says, well, when he gets the opportunity, he'll kick a ball. He really is into playing football, and when there's football, when there's a soccer match at the other side of the world, he'll get up and watch it. This kind of cartoon, I don't think you will see Xi Jinping portrayed in this way anymore. This is early days when his team tried to make him as human as possible, and slowly he is developing into something a bit more like Mao Zedong. This is a picture of a military parade where Xi Jinping is standing in a car and takes a military parade. And this is in 2015, as far as I can remember. And at the time, people on Chinese social media looked for this picture of Winnie the Pooh because that was basically a sort of a joke, like, well, our leader looks a bit like this. And Winnie the Pooh came into the narrative, came into Chinese social media after Obama and Xi Jinping were walking together at a summit in the US. And one of the pictures was really almost like Winnie the Pooh and Tigger. So the connection Winnie the Pooh and Xi Jinping was made. But this picture turned out to be the most censored picture of the year. Doesn't mean that Winnie the Pooh is completely censored all the time, but if you want to compare Xi Jinping to Winnie the Pooh, that is a no-go. So there are boundaries to what you can say and what you can do. Xi, as a soccer fan, a sort of a frivolous portrayal of Xi Jinping is not really in fashion anymore. So what you see is, if there's something really important happens in the Chinese press, all the newspapers print exactly the same thing, and that's because there are daily instructions to what the press can print and bring, including what with a picture, not a picture, on the front page or in internal pages. So daily instructions for all media that provide information, political information, about how to approach a subject. And that, of course, also shows that there are quite a few red lines for China's press. Media guidelines are that there are lots of do-nots. And a lot of these do-nots are about disturbing public order or undermining national unity. But it's also disturbing social harmony, spreading superstition, spreading gossip, or spreading vulgarity. And especially this disturbing social harmony is very, very vague, and that's intentionally so, because it can be used against anybody who does anything at any time. Because it is so vague. And around the time these media guidelines were published, there was also a secret document that came to light, that was leaked, and that was called document number 9. And this document, so next to these media guidelines, this document warns against all sorts of dangerous Western values. And these dangerous Western values are press freedom, an independent judiciary, and civil society. So for people in the Chinese press and for the whole propaganda department, it's very clear what you can and what you cannot do. This, I think, was an important moment in 2016. Xi Jinping was already quite well established. And he visited, in one day, he visited People's Daily, the daily newspaper, Xinhua press agency, CCTV, and China Radio International. And at CCTV, he was met with a banner from these Chinese journalists saying, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is our last name. So giving Xi the message that they feel their job is not to produce journalism, but to speak about the accomplishments of the CCP. If you then look at different forms of propaganda, and that's what we're going to talk about this evening, I think the main thing is to tell China's story well. So tell positive stories about what's happening within China. Support those stories, so that's what the whole propaganda machine is doing, amplifying those stories. And millions, no, billions of dollars are being invested into this, into Chinese international active media. Ways of looking at the narrative and trying to push the narrative into a certain direction are through all sorts of people who are not in the media but who flood the zone of social media, where if there is a certain development that needs amplification, lots of people are going to retweet or share or applaud or like messages that are deemed important. So on one hand, it's really pushing a positive story. On the other hand, it's repressing negative news. So that's basically what we talk about when we talk about censorship. There are a lot of people in China, and one of the estimates is 2 million people who are called, whose work it is to keep the internet clean. Sanitation workers is what they call themselves. So that is what's happening. So a lot of information that is coming up on social media, for instance, if it's not wanted, it will be censored. Another way is to limit access of the complete internet environment. We all know the Great Firewall. And to limit access to certain places. And that can be a place where there happens to be a demonstration of people who want their money back from a bank that is going bankrupt, or going to Xinjiang or to Tibet or whatever. So really sealing off a territory to avoid getting a negative story out. And another way to repress negative news is to harass journalists. And that's what's happening to many international correspondents who work in Beijing or in the rest of China, who are being harassed every now and then. Some of them are being expelled. So work to get stories out of China is being made incredibly difficult. And on top of that, also part of a whole propaganda effort is diplomats who are quite assertive. And in the past we spoke a lot about wolf warrior tactics of diplomacy. Bullying, assertiveness, and a lot of whataboutism. So shifting the blame and saying, well, you can have negative comments about us, but you have all sorts of skeletons in your closet yourself. And a form of propaganda is disinformation. Things that are not true, but if you repeat them often enough, they might feel to become true. That is part of it, and spreading doubt is another part. Russia is doing quite a bit of the same thing. So looking at China's narratives, especially the way China positions itself internationally, there is quite a fierce anti-US, almost daily news about the US in a very negative, portrayed in a very negative light. China partly sort of echoes the Russian propaganda, the source of the war in Ukraine. It's all NATO's and the US's fault. So the Russian narrative, just shifting narrative, is a way to try to convince people of China's stand, and in this instance also Russia's stand. Sometimes, and this is really a daily thing, there's negative news in the 7 o'clock news, for instance, on China's television, but also in newspapers like these cartoons. Sometimes it becomes friendly suddenly. And so this was published at a time when Xi Jinping and President Biden met. So there is a friendly face suddenly. One important narrative, if you look at how China tries to portray its position and its rise and its strong position towards the West especially, is the West is in decline. A very effective voice, especially towards the global South, with very strong anti-colonialist tendencies. And the reason this has a lot of impact, not just internally in China, because it shows Chinese population that China is doing really well, and the West is, but China's on the rise and the West is going down. But it also opens up a whole sort of intimate discussion with the global South that has suffered from colonial times. So Xi Jinping is now quite often portrayed as the person who explains what is good for China and good for the world. So he instructs. And I think one of the things we get to discuss tonight is these propaganda posters, they're cute and they're interesting and they're nice, so it's sort of harmless. And I would say it's not so harmless, because it is a massive effort to make sure that a certain narrative gets a lot of attention and a lot of play, and all sorts of other stories are being pushed aside. And this is done on a daily basis. So I would say don't underestimate the effect, both domestically in China and internationally. Years of alternative facts that have been presented, not just in propaganda efforts, but also in China's education system, have led a lot of people to believe certain things about Tibet or about Xinjiang. And it's very difficult to open up a discussion about what actually is taking place on the ground. You can also see that this is a system that has been gearing towards suppressing important information, and we saw that at the beginning of COVID, where the system itself is really trying to push things away and to not let information come to light. And that means that certain policy measures cannot be taken. And we see that this whole system over the years has produced quite a strong nationalist or maybe even chauvinist feeling among the Chinese population. And what we've seen in the past year are a couple of very aggressive acts against Americans, but also against Japanese. So there were some knife attacks, which were called, of course, incidents. It's not a really big wave, but it does give food for thought whether pushing a very chauvinistic language matters or not. Words do matter, to paraphrase Kamala Harris. Internationally, there is some influence too. Chinese influence on information worldwide can be felt by the push of certain narratives, and we can also see it in Dutch media. And one of the most clear ways of seeing it is the way in which Dutch correspondents in China cannot really do their work in the way they wanted to, because they cannot move around freely, but also because sources dry up. People do not feel at ease to speak to foreign journalists, and in that way it's almost impossible to produce certain stories. So, looking ahead. This is Xi Jinping taking the oath for a third term. And most people predict that he'll probably stay for another fourth term as well. I think it is important to try to understand China's narratives and to also think about our own narratives. What is important here in the Netherlands and in Europe, and how can we offer some sort of an alternative narrative? And looking at how Xi has made it possible for himself to get a third term, I'm afraid that the space in China to even offer a slightly different perspective and a slightly different opinion will continue to shrink. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ardi. Thank you for coming back to the table to join the discussion here. I think a lot of food for thought there. I already briefly introduced Florian Schneider. He's professor of modern China at the University of Leiden. He focuses on Chinese media and political communication in China and is also the academic director of the LeidenAsiaCentre, by the way. Florian, how do you view what Ardi just said about the harmful effects of Chinese, let's say the darker side of, or the darker effects of Chinese propaganda?
Yeah. I think we are in agreement in a lot of this assessment. One problem I certainly also see, and some anxiety that I share, is in fact about disinformation, misinformation. And I have actually pointed out that we talk a lot about decoupling between different places in the world, and that we should be worried about reality decoupling, with people diving into their own little rabbit holes of conspiracy theories. There's plenty to criticize in the Chinese case about that. I don't know if you're familiar, but there's been humongous amounts of conspiracy theories around COVID and how it originated in the US and was all the US military's doing. And so some people believe that, and it doesn't help when, as you say, wolf warrior diplomats kind of facilitate that with their own disinformation, and that has happened. So I think that's worth criticizing. I think where we locate the problem slightly differently is that I am concerned about these effects in China in a similar way that I'm concerned about these effects in Europe or in America, and that is emphatically not an attempt at whataboutism, but an attempt to try and understand what are some of the global or near global processes that are creating these situations in our societies that make people group together in these toxic ways. I think China is a fascinating place to look at how that happens. That problem interacts with propaganda, but I think in more complicated ways than this now seems, because I think in many cases the propaganda is meant to intervene, and the conspiracy theory I mentioned notwithstanding for a moment, but it's often meant to intervene and actually create a more healthy spiritual civilization. And I might not always agree that that's a didactically wise thing to do. But
can you give an example of how they try to kind of make the debate more healthy, let's say?
Well, there's more issues that are subject of propaganda than these capital P politics issues that we're now talking about. You mentioned earlier, public service announcements. There's plenty of propaganda, and I like that some of our audience members already pointed out, some of the Dutch stuff, if the government speaks, maybe that's propaganda. Some of that propaganda is unapologetically meant to inform people about certain values. And in many cases, it's difficult to take fault with those values. Take care of your fellow man or woman, make sure to wear a mask in public during a pandemic. These kind of things are useful. Someone has to say them. So the government is sort of caught in this tension between, on the one hand, trying to provide factual information on crisis moments and on very practical things in everyday life, while at the same time having this moral background, this moral mandate, or feel that they have this moral mandate to make society better by also giving people the right things to think, right? The right socialist values, for example. And that's, I think, something where propaganda from Europe or America differs somewhat, because it's on the one hand not as explicitly moralistic and paternalistic, but also it's not as clearly designed around a core of values that have been clearly communicated and set. And again, that we don't have to like that, but it's important to understand that, I think.
When about Western, let's say, propaganda, there was a time when those moral values were quite heavily pushed. When did that change?
In the West, you mean?
In the West, yeah.
That I can't really speak to. I mean,
Okay.
I think that's still the case. But I don't think, probably with the advances of communication technology, and we'll have a chance to talk about that in the second half, it's not the case anymore that media and communication are in the hands of only a small group of people who communicate top down to the many, but now everyone's involved. I mean, right?
In the West or in everywhere. Yeah, okay.
Everywhere.
Because can you tell us who decides what is the official narrative? Who decides the let's say the propaganda line?
In China.
How does that work in China?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because it can look sometimes from the outside as if what happens in propaganda in China is a monolithic endeavor, clearly assembled by the people at the top of the party. And I'm pretty sure the people at the top of the party also want to think that and want us to think that, but it's not quite true. So there is a central propaganda department. And there's an ideological group that also does a lot of ideology work, and that comes up with all these concepts and values. A very famous person involved in this is Wang Huning. I don't know if you've ever heard of that man, one of the longest standing committee members who's still around. He survived all the purges, he's still around. He invented all the major propaganda concepts for the last 30 years, which is pretty outstanding. 30 years. Yeah, just about. He started with Jiang Zemin, then Hu Jintao, Wen Jiabao, all the harmonious society stuff was his doing, and now the China Dream has his fingerprints all over it as well. And so you have people who design the stuff at the top, but then what happens with it once the local provincial governments, the city governments do something with these mandates can be quite diverse. And sometimes you get results like propaganda during COVID, right? Help Wuhan. Everyone should be on board with how Wuhan is suffering. There were some beautiful propaganda videos that came out that brought tears to my eyes. And I'm thinking, oh, that's really, really well done. Whether you like it or not, but it's just fantastically done. And then you look at other propaganda videos that are supposed to sell the Belt and Road Initiative to foreigners, and you're just cringing at how horrible this stuff is, and you're wondering, who's this for, right? So that happens because you have all these different actors, and these are just the state actors and the party actors getting involved. Much of this is then also outsourced to private actors. So you have private companies who make propaganda content. Sometimes they do so well. Sometimes they run with things in ways that sell interestingly urban cosmopolitan upper elite narratives under the banner of the China Dream or something similar. And you're wondering, hey, was that really what was intended when the Communist Party was trying to roll that out? And so I think you're right that a lot of the space for that has shrunk, has gotten more limited, especially in the last couple of years. But I find it intriguing that also this attempt to bring different actors on board from society and make this a collaborative effort is a continuation of what the Hu Jintao, Wen Jiabao government also did. And when that grows out of hand, then the censorship comes in. And we might want to remember that also Hu Jintao, Wen Jiabao, harmonious society, a lot of joking at the time of how everyone's blogs were getting harmonized because that government also didn't like it when there were sudden voices that cropped up. And so I see much of this, as much as it's gotten stronger, as an extension, almost a logical extension of what also came before. And again, emphatically, something that's happening in China, but the effects that we are going to talk about, I think, a couple of times today, that this has on people making sense of politics and as a window onto the world. That shrinkage, I think, happens in large parts also because of the way that digital and social media work. In China, that's a particular case because of also the Great Firewall and so on. But we see very similar effects in social media elsewhere in the world with similarly worrying, I think, tendencies. And then people disappear into their conspiracy theories, whether government officials were involved or not. And sometimes they are. Right.
Can I react?
Yeah, please. Before we invite the next panel, I have one more question for you.
My view of propaganda is a bit broader than yours. So I include media and the whole media industry as part of the whole propaganda effort. And that's why I showed the visit of Xi Jinping to the major media outlets, the Xinhua and People's Daily, etc. Because the way the news is being presented, but also made, and the fact that all the political information has to be okayed, and you can only use official information, and all these front pages show that as well, has the results into a very strong narrative about all sorts of things in society. And what I've seen, because I've been active in journalism for a long time, but I've also taught journalism at a Chinese university, at Jinan University in Guangzhou in the south. And I did that since about 2013, so when Xi Jinping came to power, until COVID, so 2019. And every year I had to work a little bit harder to get my students, who were really intelligent and active and wanted to learn. But in 2013, it was much easier for me to sort of open their minds a little bit and convince them that there were other ways of looking at exactly the same facts. In 2019, it became almost impossible. So the fact that this whole machine of propaganda and media, the whole information that's being provided, makes it very, very difficult to make space for an alternative interpretation.
Yeah.
And for me, that is the essence.
May I jump in? You have other
Just
questions?
one more. No, then because we're going to talk about the effectiveness of the propaganda in a minute. Once I've invited the Manya and Huangqian to come and sit here as well. But before we do, I am curious to know, because now we've kind of described the arc, let's say, from 1949 till 2024. Is there can you say that there is a message that sort of rings throughout those 75 years and narratives that have changed? Maybe to both of you, this question. Florian, you first.
I think
that there's a similar message still now that has been pushed throughout 75 years.
I think it's worth keeping in mind that there is a break with the end of the Cultural Revolution and the way that things got presented.
1976.
Yeah, 78. 76, 78.
Right.
And that the reform era started a very different understanding of how communication and propaganda should work. That said, there are some recurring themes that don't change. And to this day, serving the people, Wei Renmin Fu, right? As a classic. Mao said it, every leader since has said it, and that is something that's just written into the Communist Party. And I think that's a standard. What has changed in my mind is that ideology seemed, for me at least, far more constrained and uniform under Mao, and has opened up further and further to the point where I think at the height of the Hu Jintao Wen Jiabao administration, it became almost a supermarket of ideology.
So that's prior to Xi Jinping?
Prior to Xi Jinping,
right.
but also under Xi Jinping, at least early in the administration, the propagandists really cashed in on that already being a resource, because you see the China Dream campaign, actually, that you nicely show, depending on where you went in China in 2013, when the big campaign started, you had everything from some Taoism, some Confucianism and Buddhism, nationalism, things that, to my eyes, looked almost fascist, but careful with that language, to labor-intense left-wing stuff, to things that were clearly consumerist, and lots of nationalism. And so it's sort of like a little bit of something for everyone. To almost turning the Communist Party into a Volkspartei, into a party that is there for everyone. And I think that is somewhat different from the initial soldiers, farmers, workers ethos of the original Communist Party.
Right, okay. And what about you, Ardi?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at, if you look at the first poster I showed about Mao being a sort of a deity and above all the parties and above all superhuman, my feeling is that slowly Xi Jinping is getting the same treatment. So he was.
I feel the opposite way, but that's just me.
Okay, excellent.
What's interesting for me is to hear every now and then you hear a Dengist, a Deng Xiaoping quote, like seeking truth from facts. So you have all these quotes that come back in also now in propaganda, and then suddenly Deng Xiaoping is not so popular anymore, so you don't hear it. So there's a lot of going up and down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much for your first contribution. If I can invite you to sit at that seat, and invite Manya and Huangqian to come to the stage, please. Give them a warm hand. Thank you so much. So, while you take your seats, I'd like to introduce Manya. Manya Koetse is the founder of What's on Weibo, which is a brilliant platform that kind of tries to bridge the gap between English language and Chinese online media sphere. She takes kind of the Krenta at the pop of the Chinese social media, I would say. And you are a blog later. I have no idea what that is, but it's great. I'm sure we can.
Blogging and translating.
Oh,
a blog later.
Oh, like that. Okay, cool. And then Huang Qian. Very well. Okay, Huang Qian. Sorry, we were joking earlier about how should I introduce Huang Qian. This is going way too far. But anyway, in the program, she's mentioned as Qian Huang, and Qian is her first name, and Huang Qian, Huang is her last name. Sorry, just an aside. Is assistant professor at Groningen University and is an expert on online communities. And one of your pet peeves is digital vigilantism and what do you call it? Cancel culture in China, which is a very interesting topic. And when I first heard that exists in China, I was thinking, oh yeah, of course, yeah, why not? Because they are very active on social media. Do you recognize anything of what has just been shared about the effectiveness of how let's say, the online communities take Chinese propaganda?
Yeah, I would say that there are definitely a certain level of effectiveness, especially if you look at how nationalism becomes a very common sense sentiment on the internet and how Chinese citizens react to events related to either Japanese issues or, of course, the anti-American sentiments. Of course, they're there. But what I want to emphasize is also that we should not ignore the citizens' agency in this case. So the propaganda does not really work as in media study we call it a hypodermic needle. So it doesn't just inject the content into humans' body, right? So it's more of a dynamic system there. So sometimes when I think about nationalism, you think about events, for example, like how Chinese citizens can cancel international brands because they are regarded as insulting China. And
because of human rights violations in Xinjiang, and there's a campaign.
That will be one, but there's also other cases where it's more really about racism and about cultural imperialism. For example, there's a brand called Dolce & Gabbana got cancelled.
Dolce & Gabbana.
Dolce & Gabbana got cancelled in 2018, and that was really because the advertisements were really racist, and that raised a wide range of sentiments, and that is to say. So what I'm saying is that not all the nationalism sentiments or not all the collective actions of the cancel culture or any kinds of these movements are purely because of propaganda. Mm-hmm. A lot of them have other kind of actors, which maybe later I will have more opportunity to talk about. For example, in fandom, in pop culture, there's a lot more other stakeholders and actors actually involved in this process.
Right. You are from China yourself originally?
Yes.
Are you aware of this cancel culture and digital vigilantism when you are active yourself? For instance, now, do you kind of make sure that you don't go too far in your statements?
Okay, so...
yes and no is fine. Sorry.
I don't think yes or no would justify the extent of the complexity of this question. And I also think that it's not only Chinese scholars or China Sinologists will feel the pressure. Part of my research actually is now trying to study how, in general, cultural workers or academics are feeling the pressure in terms of present themselves online and present themselves on media, because of cancel culture is not just happening in China, but everywhere. Mm-hmm, for sure. So what I would say is that I think, yes, I do feel that I need to choose my words carefully, but not only because of the Chinese propaganda system, but also in general, since nowadays, like, online media are just savage.
Right. I see. Okay, thank you for your openness. Manya, you've just sorry, Manya and I know each other a little bit longer, so I call you Manya. You've been to China recently, where you saw, I think, lots of trends in terms of propaganda and modern day propaganda, and also you've been witnessing that for many years, following Chinese social media. Can you give us, what kind of examples can you mention of Chinese propaganda now?
Now, okay, well, to give you the short story, considering the time we have, I think the most important thing to know right now is that we're really witnessing a major shift in Chinese propaganda in this digital age. I mean, the digital age has been ongoing for a long time already. We're getting old. But I think something really new happened a few years ago in 2017. Like you already said, and Florian actually also said, propaganda is no longer a one-way street. There are multiple actors involved. It's getting multidimensional. And I think in the early years of social media, you saw that party channels were trying to feed a little bit here and there. Let's see how we're doing it. And then they noticed that the attention was diverted because the youth, they want to see pop stars, they want to see celebrity culture, brands, fashion, everything's happening. Mm-hmm. The world is at your feet on all these apps and social media. So in 2017, what you see is that there's a major shift. Instead of trying to draw the youth to the official narratives of the official propaganda, blended into the very fabric of social media itself. And I think that's the shift that we're now seeing. And in doing so, you see all kinds of new strategies. So what is the youth liking? The youth loves cute anime, manga, influenced a lot by Japanese pop culture. So like Ardi also showed the example before, let's make Xi Jinping into a cute anime. This was in 2017 mainly that this happened. But also in a time of digitalization and more AI and a lot of stuff like that, they're also tying propaganda into gamification, having AI-driven narratives. For example, presenters on TV that give you propaganda. They're virtual presenters. Clapping games that you can clap on a speech of Xi Jinping, and if you clap as loud as you can, then you can win from your friends.
So it's just a bit of fun, basically.
Fun, and these are all different ways, different tactics that are ongoing right now and over the past 7 years, where you see that they're trying out new things the whole time to really draw in people, and it's a hit and miss. I think this is something that we're not realizing.
Sometimes it's effective, sometimes it just completely falls dead.
Exactly, because social media is interactive by nature. So you can drop something on social media, but if nobody likes it, then okay, you can have your other official accounts like each other and applaud for each other, but you really have to strike a chord among the netizens. There are 1 billion social media users in China, 1 billion. So it's not just getting your narrative out there. It's really
does that also mean that
needs to resonate.
What you see on social media is quite representative of the, let's say, the common opinion among Chinese? Because if you look at X or Twitter, it's always said that that's only like quite a narrow community, and the people who shout the loudest, et cetera, so you can't really take it at face value. How does that work in China?
Well, you cannot take anything at face value when you have a lot of censorship. I mean, social media are always controlled. But I think you do have certain propaganda campaigns that either are so effective or so not effective that you cannot lie with those statistics. Something fails or something becomes a hit. And you can see that some things are definitely super, super effective. And that, for example, one hashtag getting 600 million views on Weibo, this is what we're talking about. So really, the huge impact of propaganda. I call it actually the hashtagification of propaganda, because it's being presented in hashtags, in a way that's easy to spread, easy to understand. Even if you just check your social media real quick, you get the message. And this is something that's very new.
What's this hashtag that gets so much? What's the type of hashtag?
Everything. But for example, we already mentioned Xinjiang a couple of times. I think a huge trend was a few years back when H&M was one of the Western brands that said we will no longer use cotton that is from Xinjiang because of alleged human rights violations over there that related to the cotton. And at that that point, you saw, I call it like a coordinated propaganda offensive from official accounts, e-commerce platforms, celebrities. Everybody was canceling H&M. And then the hashtag, of course, is "We support Xinjiang cotton." I've never seen so much Xinjiang cotton before on all the e-commerce platforms. So the impact is not to be underestimated when you mobilize 1 billion people.
And so, sorry, Chen, do you feel that that is a genuine sort of, let's say, a people's movement, or is it all choreographed?
I want to, okay, so as a researcher, I'm always kind of very staying away from the absolutes, right? And I know like it might not be satisfying for the audience to hear, but so in general, yes, there are the genuine nationalism coming out from these hashtag movements, but of course there are also commercial entities that are tagging along. They're just trying to ride the wagon and then try to profit from this, and so. There are also commercial media. So when Ardi mainly talk about the state-owned media, right? People's Daily, Global Times, but there are also a wide range of commercial media and also content creators, influencers online. And they are also riding this wave. And if it's possible, can you show my last slide? Yes. So if you see this, so for the people who don't read Chinese, I will explain to you. So this is a announcement. This is actually a criticism from People's Daily, so the state-owned media. So the criticism is that what is patriotism? And please do not use patriotism as your business. So basically, the state is also responding to the fact that there are content creators and there are influencers are using nationalist sentiments to profit, to gain clicks, to gain views, and that is recognized by the state as well. And so to respond to your question, basically, there are genuine sentiments, but there are also people and entities just riding along.
So this is kind of what I mean, that's what it looks like to me, what you were mentioning earlier, how they try to sort of make the debate a little bit healthier. Is that right? Or is this not what you mean?
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I also was thinking of things like vigilantism and cyberbullying and these kind of issues where the party feels it needs to intervene, much like states here need to intervene. But this is interesting because the state often gets outmaneuvered on what we would call the far right. In China, it's the far left. On its own territory, home territory, either by extreme Maoists and Marxists, and not a lot of them, but they exist, or by the extreme nationalists. And then the party tries to shut it down because, as we saw with the recent tragic death of a Japanese kid in Shenzhen, that can go vastly out of hand. And then, of course, again, the whataboutism and all that has nothing to do at all with our nationalism. But it really is hard to disconnect these two things, just like we wouldn't disconnect nationalist rhetoric in America from a shooting or something, or gun narratives from a shooting. So this is where the party then tries to get back on message.
Put the ghost back into the...
Yeah, and try to create effectively a healthy patriotism, or sometimes it's also called a rational patriotism, rather than talking about nationalism, because nationalism is the dark one, but patriotism is the good one that we have. As a scholar of nationalism, I think these two things are the same thing. Or at least variations of that. But this is just one example, I think, of how the party then tries to get back control.
Even like this week, there was an enormous rise in the stock markets because of government action, and then you can see that it sort of gets out of control because people buy and buy and buy, and you see a bubble coming up, and that is something that makes the government sort of nervous then as well. So they try to dampen it and say that don't buy so much, and so you see they some new information is being thrown somewhere, and it's being picked up in such an enthusiastic way that it needs to be dampened again.
Yeah.
I mean, Manya has, I think, also reported many times on food scandals and health scandals and the sort of things that are not always on the radar for Western audiences about China. Like, what do people really care about? And what is misinformation and disinformation doing to public discussion in China? And then you have interventions there where the state says, we got to clean this up because people are believing bizarre things about food. But maybe you have some examples of how that works. I don't know. I'm putting you on the spot, but
no. Well, if I can, I would actually like to go back to another thing you said about having so many extreme nationalists in China. That another thing that I've been seeing over the past few years is that you see that official channels, they don't even need to make their own propaganda anymore. They can just use what others are making, what other netizens are making. They're okay. We can use this to our advantage. This is actually pretty good. So you have computer graphic artists, digital artists who are making really anti-Western artworks, and yeah, they use it. I don't know if we have a picture of that. Yeah, for example, this is an Australian soldier killing a child. You see bodies underneath the flag, and this is alluding to human rights violations in Afghanistan. So this is again what Ardi also said, turning the tables and saying, yeah, you are saying that we are violating human rights, but actually you in the West are doing so. So this is of course a manipulated image, and it was created by an independent artist, which is then used again. So this is something that you're seeing. So it's very interesting actually to see how multidimensional propaganda is becoming, and this tension field with these extremists. So sometimes they can use them, and sometimes they're like, no, now you're going too far. But this is something that they could use. Same here for the Xinjiang cotton. Yeah. Also created by another well-known independent artist.
May I jump in with a remark that I think has already come through from both of your comments so far, which is that we should be very careful, as Floris also says, with the people who scream the loudest, right? Just because this is so highly visible does not necessarily mean it represents much. But I'm wondering, Jen, how do you feel about sort of the spiral of silence that you're studying and the vigilantism essentially shutting up the other voices, right? I mean, how does that interplay work?
Yeah, so to explain to the audience, digital vigilantism is basically when you feel offended and then you just decided to punish the offender by exposing them on social media and then shame them and harass them potentially. So that has been a tactic used very often by Chinese citizens, and for good and for bad. At the same time. So if we look at before Xi Jinping took power, like before 2013, there was a huge wave of digital vigilantism cases against corrupt officials, and that was used for good in that sense. And then, but right now, what I see is that there's a rising cases about. Triggered by nationalism, by this different kind of sentiments, and. I think this really brings the civil society kind of into, as you said, the spiral of the silence. And but at the same time, we should also not forget that even though the civil society is struggling, but there is also a strong force coming through and trying to fight against these oppressions. There are still, for example, the gender discourses and also the gender discussions about feminism, discussions about domestic violence, for example, they are still existing online, and there are people who use digital vigilantism or online exposure to fight against those behavior as well. So it is really hard to, whenever I got asked, how do you see digital vigilantism or how do you see cancel culture, it's always hard to answer because you can use it for good and bad. And it is effective in both ways, actually. So, yeah.
So about the effectiveness, you say that it has become very effective through social media. I mean, social media has been kind of like a driver of the effectiveness of propaganda? Is that what you...
No, well, what I said is sometimes it can be very effective and sometimes not at all. So
when is it not effective?
Well, during COVID, you saw that there was growing unrest, growing discontent among people during the heavy lockdown times. And at that time, you also have had a lot of these hashtags of, let's see how, America's doing so bad. And then there were people using these hashtags, so promoted by the official media, and they were using them to criticize China. And that's when you have a problem, because, oh shit, it's, People's Daily is putting this out to millions of people, and then suddenly it's being used against them, and it completely backfires. So you see this happening, and then you will see a hashtag like that gets pulled offline at a certain point. So that's a moment of not effective propaganda, because people just don't take it. At a time when everybody's unhappy, you want to criticize America, sure, we can use this to our advantage to avoid censorship.
Right.
So that's a good example, I think. And then you have, when it's very effective, I think, what I just mentioned, but the Xinjiang cotton campaign. But there are so many different types of propaganda that are very effective, like, for example, very soft, cute things. Biden visited China last year, and he complimented Xi Jinping's car, which is Hongqi. It's like the Chinese Cadillac. And he was like, oh, this is a great car. Yeah, said Xi Jinping, this is made in China. And then that 12-second video gets promoted everywhere, and all the officials are tweeting it out, and everybody's like, this is so great, we've made it. We're no longer looking at Cadillac and Mercedes. No, now it's our own Hongqi. This is a sign of Chinese wealth, of our prosperity, and the China dream is we're going to realize it.
Okay.
I also want to add in like some cases where it is successful, right? So as you said, that fashion and fun, all these are the things that attracts people. So for now, there is one thing that's very, very popular, which is guofeng. So it's Chinese style, traditional Chinese style. So as aesthetic style, it becomes very popular, and partially because the government is also endorsing this idea of revival of the traditional Chinese culture, paired up with the rising awareness of the culture, how to say, like the injustice faced by Chinese culture globally, especially like cultural appropriation in the West. And then now the Chinese, new generation of Chinese people start to use this new China style 新国风, 新中式 to express themselves. And then, so that is also massively successful. It is very hidden of propaganda, but actually I think it is more successful than the ones that are very obviously out there. Yeah.
I'm curious. Ardi, in her talk towards the end, said that there is a really dark side and a really dark effect and a harmful effect of the Chinese, the way that China is pushing its narratives. Do you see that too?
Yeah, of course. So there are, the phenomena described by Ardi, for example, the shrinking space for foreign journalists, I think that is definitely true. And also media outlets, especially even not only state-owned media, but also commercial media outlets, feel the shrinking space, I think. And I guess people are also experiencing a lot of self-censorship. People are careful of what they say or not online, and especially if you look at the recent, like the celebration of the National Day, celebrities are not forced but propelled to post, to repost and post Weibo or social media posts about loving China, and also there are also a lot of controversy about which words to use, whether you use 中华 or 中国. So there's a lot of debate in that as well. So yes, I do see there's a shrinking space in terms of the expressions. Yeah.
So at the same time, during the hoe zeg je dat, voorgesprek, you mentioned that in China, I mean, and this is where the fine line between propaganda and public information maybe comes to the fore again. What we consider propaganda is not always perceived as a bad or an evil thing.
Oh no, but that has to do with the Chinese word for propaganda itself is neutral. It's a neutral word. It basically just means publicity as well. So I mean, if you look on Chinese media for propaganda films, you will just get the latest propaganda films. And I mean, it's nothing bad about it. So it's just an inherent part of media, the media system. So I think that's something to think about, that when we think about propaganda, it must be bad, and it's not conceived that way.
Mm-hmm. And is there, looking at the future, and in a minute we'll go to the room to see if there are any questions, but looking to the future, is there a narrative that they're currently trying to sort of push that has not yet taken hold? Because I can think of a number of things that have taken hold quite effectively over the years.
Positivity.
Positivity?
Yeah, positive.
Now it's
everyone has to be positive.
Okay.
And it's, I mean, if you're a young university graduate looking down the barrel of joblessness, then being positive is pretty difficult. So easier to lie flat, right?
Yeah.
Do all sorts of subtle forms of resistance and signaling that you're.
We have to stay positive. What, in a sort of like, I don't know, American 1950s
in a toxic
kind of like.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
That's my take, my hot take. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the main trend is you really need to be very positive. So what you see in speeches as well is people from renowned universities in China who used to feel the space to be a little bit more critical in helping shape policy, now feel the need to start with praise of Xi Jinping and a quote, etc., and then maybe one line or a paragraph with some questions of how some things might be improved, and then more praise and how China really is doing well. And so it really needs you need so much praise and positivity, and then this one line. So people and Chinese people know how to read between lines. So they read this one line. They know where the criticism is.
Right.
But it's a lot of sugar is needed.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm curious. We've been shamefully neglecting you. If there are any questions in the room, yes, I see a hand over there in the middle. Eva, do you want to do the honors? You've got a microphone? Yeah, there. Sir, on the third row, fourth, in fact.
Hello. Thank you.
Sorry, can you please say who you direct the question to? Because there are four people.
So I want to direct this question to kind of everyone.
No, that's not allowed. You have to. Otherwise, other people can't.
To the keynote speaker then. So I've been traveling to China for about 10 years, and I have lots of Chinese friends, and most of them are very aware of this. They all have VPNs, and they explain to me that the Chinese are able to say things without saying it. And oftentimes the censors have to kind of catch up. So I was wondering if you could maybe explain a little bit about that tension. And if you don't mind, one more question, if that's okay?
Yeah, no, go for it.
So I'm wondering about the tension between two different kinds of propaganda, right? Because you have one propaganda that's speaking to the domestic public and one propaganda that's speaking to the world. And sometimes the propaganda that's speaking to the world gets interpreted by the domestic public in ways that may create problems for the party. And other times the vice versa happens, and I was wondering if you could maybe share some insights into those dynamics and kind of tease out how they work.
First, the fact that we just ended with Chinese people know exactly how to read between the lines, and they play with information and with hashtags and with. So a very well-known example is Tiananmen, 1989, 4th of June. Of course, censored, and very soon people started to talk about the 35th of May. And then, so whenever something is censored, or Me Too is rice bowl rabbit or whatever, so they use the sound to make people aware of what it sounds like, and everyone knows what's being said. So there's a lot of creativity, and it's very much a cat and mouse game, and some people really enjoy playing that. So the idea is you get something out on the internet and it gets shared, and maybe it's going to be censored, but once it has been shared, it will, depending on the topic, roll on. Let me see, what's your second? Yeah. I have been, I teach at the University of Amsterdam and give keynotes in different places. I use a lot of videos of Chinese state media and some propaganda productions. And whenever we look at state media productions or real sort of COVID narratives or whatever. The big question is, who is this meant for? I usually show stuff that's being published in English, so probably meant for an international audience, but brought in such a way that the message is lost on the international audience. So probably it also harks back to a national audience. So that is all. It's always a question, and it's not always easy to answer that. But maybe one of the other. I'm sure you have something to add.
Florian, go first, Maya.
Well, we have a very.
I think there are more questions. So if you want to...
I'll try to keep it short, specifically on that second point, because I happen to have done quite a bit of work on the Beijing Olympics, both the old ones and the new ones, and the Shanghai Expo and things like that. There was a moment under the Hu Jintao administration where soft power was sort of at its height, and the national and the international messages really aligned quite neatly, and I think the Beijing Olympics 2008 were that big example. And then you have a year later, the 60th anniversary of the PRC. Now we had the 75 one. And the parade was this massive military parade with lots of Mao posters and all sorts of things like that, meant for a domestic audience, but of course it's still internationally visible. And then the international audience says, well, what was the Olympics about? Seems like a lie now. You have all these tanks rolling across Tiananmen Square, so is it harmonious and peaceful, or is it this? And so you had that tension almost immediately, and I think that continues to this day. I do think some of these tensions then also, much like you say, we should see them in the light that much of the stuff that now comes out of China's propaganda is meant, yes, for domestic audiences, but also for a much smaller domestic audience, which is the Communist Party itself. So I don't think that much of the foreign targeted communication is really meant for us or even the general public. It's meant to show, look, we used the budget well. Yeah, we had this budget and now we have videos, ergo give us more budget. That's my take on that.
Interesting. Yes, here at the front there is
maybe it would be nice to. We have a video in English, an English propaganda video, which Manya sent to us. Maybe it would be nice to see a bit of it.
Oh, okay, sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite catchy.
I think, very short, I think this is a foreign-facing propaganda that is actually meant for a domestic goal. Because this went very big on Chinese social media, and the idea was like, oh, look what we are sending abroad. But actually, it wasn't big on Twitter or anywhere at all. So it was actually meant for a domestic goal. Yeah.
Very good. That's a great insight. Thank you. I was going to give the microphone to the sir on the second row. Yes.
Hey, thanks.
Who is this question to? Sorry.
To well, perhaps to Florian. So
Florian.
I was born in China. And I grew up in the U.S. So I certainly appreciate your comments about, these common concerns across the different continents, both in the East and the West. I'm also a patron of Asia Society, so I definitely appreciate the nuanced perspective. But my question is, I've always thought that, so as a Chinese person, I always thought as a people and also leadership, we just have a chip over our shoulders the size of a mountain. All we want is respect from the West, right? But I've always thought that the Chinese government and the country as a whole has a horrible PR strategy in the West. Like, it is the most ineffective, the worst. I mean, you can see who's going to believe that video, right? I mean, other examples are like Mulan, the movie, as well as like how social credit system was defined or translated, at least, right? So I was wondering, like, if what are your thoughts there? Is it like a severe cultural gap between the two? What's causing that? Yeah.
I sorry for turning away from you, but I was told I should speak into the mic, so I have you in mind. I'm really glad that you're bringing this up, because I do think there is a didactical problem with a lot of what the Chinese Communist Party tries to do. I'm not fully understanding that what they think works in China, and it doesn't necessarily there either, would work abroad, and then it definitely does not. There was an attempt ever since, I would say, the late 90s, early 2000s, to open the soft power game up to private companies and say, we're going to be successful if we also have genes, or if we also have, these big blockbuster Hollywood movies. And there the tension is official produced stuff does not work for the reasons that you described. It's just boring. No one wants to see that. But there are these individual cases where you suddenly see some viral thing happening online, or most recently, just anyone into video games, Black Myth Wukong, the video game, blew up, right? Because it's not made by the state. It doesn't have this didactical message. It's just fun. It's just there for its own right, but it contains Chinese content, and that flies. And so I think there's these moments where there's realization, and also Korean soft power, Japanese soft power, and so on, they work because the state has promoted cultural industries, but then left them to their own devices. But I have the impression, and maybe I'm overreacting there, that most of the Chinese propaganda gets made by pretty old men who just won't let go of that understanding, and probably that's why we're not going to see a major shift in that attitude just yet.
So I saw you smile when you were saying it's like a most ridiculous thing you ever saw. You were smiling quite. What's the word? Yeah, you were smiling.
Yeah. So I totally agree with what Florian was saying. It's part of the reason is exactly who are responsible for making those videos, who are the decision makers, and most of the time the successful cases will be that these high up old men are not in charge, and then the content that are produced are actually appealing for the general public. So yeah, that's why I was smiling.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to say myself, I worked for the NOS for quite a long time, and Reuters and Associated Press, they have a deal with CCTV and CGTN, and they send their CCTV material, unadulterated, in the mix of Reuters and AP video clips, and there is. I was often quite impressed with the quality of CGTN reportage from Xinjiang, for instance, or stuff like that. But more to the point, I think a lot of the footage that is kind of in those clips, it's usually when it's edited and re-edited by NOS editors, it's not used from start to finish, but just images, and those images sometimes contain subliminal messaging, and it's in that sense it's fairly effective, I find. Whether that's the actual goal, I'm not sure, but I just noticed that there's less awareness in the newsroom with Western television companies of the perhaps the effect of something like that. Anyway, sorry for that. Yeah, all the way in the back there is a question.
Thank you. Well, my question is to Xiang. You talked about the rise of nationalists on social media and this social vigilantism. And I can imagine with social media, with both these nationalists doing it for themselves and also propaganda from the state coming in on social media, isn't there also a counter-reaction, just like we see here in the West, in Europe, a lot of anti-government sentiment is coming up?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I would say that because of the experience that Chinese people have with the government, and normally if you want to get something done, you don't you don't target your anger towards the government directly. So you talk about the issue at hand. For example, if you want to solve domestic violence issues, if there's or gender inequality, they just directly talk about the issue instead of direct the anger saying that the government is not doing something right. So it's more about, okay, so now we have a problem, let's solve this. So that will be how the digital vigilantism targeting not government-sponsored issues will look like. So it's not going to be directly anti-government, but it will be just very practical, very pragmatic ways of dealing with that.
I saw a lot more hands earlier. Yeah, Ms. Shang. Yeah, sorry, komt eraan. Hallo.
Thank you for sharing your insightful ideas and also doing research on Chinese propaganda strategies. And I have a question for Florian and Ardi, because when we talk about propaganda, it gives me an impression that the state media work as a whole. But in practice, I think it's not the case, because I remember a book published this year saying that when there are criticism and dissidence online, the central government tends to direct the dissidents to local governments to strengthen people's loyalty to the central government. And the propaganda departments at different levels, they are very different in terms of the resources they have or they can use. So I was wondering in your research if you'll find any clues like the nuances between government propaganda department at different levels and the conflicts and tensions between these departments. Thank you.
Shall I start? I think very much in general, and going back to the very first slide I showed of Mao being sort of above a superhuman. That is the way the Chinese Communist Party is portrayed, where the blame always, as you say, always goes down. So you have the top has sort of broad policy objectives, and whenever something goes wrong, then it's always the local people. And we've seen that. For instance, during COVID, which there was an outbreak in Wuhan. First, the local authorities tried to shove all the information under the table, and that didn't happen. It sort of blew up, but it's never the central government's fault, and the blame for whatever is happening is always pushed down, which leads to a whole atmosphere of shifting blame, but also of silence. Some difficult things better not to discuss. Bad news better not bring that bad news. And I remember also at the start of social media, one of the most well-known cases was in 2013. I think the Wenzhou train crash, where a train crashed, and this was a high-speed train, and it was really, the Chinese authorities did not want it to become public. So they said it acted as if nothing happened, and then photos came up. So when then there is evidence that actually something has happened, a bit similar to COVID, then local authorities really need to scramble to try to come up with an acceptable story, and that's what you see time and again.
Florian?
Yeah, two comments, because the first is about the media environment and the second is about this central-local blame game. So on the media environment, Tian already told us that there's plenty of commercial actors, and many of the state media now also, for a long time, have been commercial. So I'd caution a little bit to elevate CCTV, Xinhua, and Renmin Ribao, so People's Daily, into the limelight as the main voices. I don't know how many people really read the People's Daily, I can't say. But those are the classic top-down messaging outlets, where one of my colleagues likes to joke that the message is always, our leaders are very busy, everything at home is great, everything abroad is terrible. That's almost always the message. But then there's the paper, and there's Caixin, and there's the Nanfang Group, and all these other organizations that tell quite different stories. unless it's about the core hot international button topics or the core leadership issues, then everyone has to get back on message. Having said that, does it work, right? And does it actually also work to say the local governments, it's always their fault, it's corruption, but the central government is here to help you? It can look that way, especially because activists in particular tend to say, Xi da da, daddy Xi, help us, because these local guys are polluting our environment. But they're doing that strategically. It doesn't mean they like Xi Jinping, and they know that that's the best way to get the message out. And we have some evidence after the term limits of Xi Jinping got extended that even on what in China again is the far left, the nationalists, the people who are most likely to endorse Xi Jinping, they had massive fights with each other online of whether that was a good development or not. So you had the hardcore Xi Jinping fans, and then you had the hardcore Deng Xiaoping fans who said, this is against everything we stand for and we have to bring those term limits back. So in that sense, there's plenty of criticism of the central government, what the central authorities do, and sometimes that criticism gets voiced. So that's just a note on diversity of what's going on, if that answers your question.
Thank you very much. There's one final question here at the front.
Mrs. Bouwers, for many years in a row, the European consumer market is flooded with cheap and what I call junk products from China. These issues, do you see that purely as an economical issue or also as propaganda?
The flooding of the markets. I think we in Europe have benefited greatly from cheap products that we bought them and we've accepted them. What you see now is China is moving up the ladder of quality production, so starting with solar panels and wind turbines, but also electric vehicles, for instance. And what we see also with the Chinese economy slowing down quite a bit is that in certain industries where, like the electric vehicle industry, there is so much production that China can sort of service the whole world. Still, it's up to us to do something about it or not. I mean, as long as we decide we want to buy the TUM or the Shein or whatever, I can't really blame China for that. What you can see in the electric vehicle market is that it has been very active Chinese policy to grow this industry and try to create what they call unicorns, very strong companies that are very difficult to compete with. I think we need to do our homework in this respect a lot better, and I'm a bit surprised by the German car industry that left a lot of opportunity to China.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. This we're going to have to save this for the third half at the bar, which is happening in a minute, but not before I've asked Manja to make one final comment, which is looking at this massive topic, 75 years of Chinese propaganda and public information and so on. What is the one thing that you would like the people to leave the room with? One crucial insight, or perhaps write some misunderstanding about the whole topic?
Well, I think everything basically we learned today. Propaganda is not one-dimensional. It's not only central. It's not only negative. It's all around you, and is multifaceted. So, as it comes down to with everything about China, it's not that black and white, and it's constantly moving. So it's very important to keep a finger on the pulse of what's happening, because you're lost in translation before you know it.
Thank you. That's very good. Well done. Thank you so much. So I would like to thank our speakers, Florian Schneider, Ardi Bouwers, Huang Qian and Manja Koetse for their great contributions. I would also like to thank Zara Toxis for great collaboration in this project, and thank everybody for coming. As I said, there is the bar down the road, so please stay for the third half and perhaps discuss the issues a little bit further. So thanks again, and keep us posted.